So in this video, I'm going to show you 3 backlit looks that I like to use. I think learning to do backlit photos is really worthwhile. It doesn't really matter what your subject is, if it's people or buildings or landscapes or whatever. Backlit photos bring the drama. They are expressive, they're moody, they can be lots of different looks, and they edit really well, even if they can be a little bit tricky to edit sometimes. There are some things you need to be aware of if you want to do it well. Just a quick note, my Black Friday sale is now on. All of my individual workshops are 20% off with the code Black Friday, and the bundle is down 10% off. Links are below if you want to check it out. Right, let's get back to the video. If you've got any questions about metering, exposure, or anything to do with how to do these kind of photos, ask in the comments and I'll try and get back to as many of you as possible. The first lighting we're going to look at is one of my favorites, and it is the off-axis backlit look. Off-axis backlighting, or what I like to call the edgeline look, which I'll explain why in a moment, is the most forgiving and easiest to work with of all of the backlighting techniques. Okay, so what is it? Why do we use it? And how do you do it? One of the big problems with backlighting is quite obvious that you have an extremely bright light source most of the time shining straight into the camera. And this creates an exposure problem. It often means that we get blown out backgrounds. So what you need to understand with backlighting is it doesn't mean the light source has to be in the frame. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. So let's say we take a natural light situation. But when you look at the sky, the area around the sun is obviously extremely bright. And your subject, be it the landscape itself, a building or a person, is going to struggle to be exposed with that background. So you could do things like you could incorporate flash, or you could do a bracketed exposure if you wanted to, or you could just let the background blow. But there's another technique you can do, which is this off-axis technique. So what we can do to get around this is we can just pick a different part of the sky that isn't as bright. And as long as we keep our subject being backlit in general, the backlighting effects, which gives us all this drama and mood and color and contrast, will still work. This is, I think, one of the biggest misconceptions, especially for beginners in photography, is that backlight means that the light is literally behind the subject, and it doesn't have to be that. We just need it to be somewhere off in that direction generally. And you can absolutely do this. I'm telling you now, anyone can do this. Absolutely anyone. You just need to practice it and it'll work. Just shoot this in manual mode, auto ISO. You could shoot it in aperture priority or program mode and let the camera figure it out, because in this instance, it's very easy for the camera to just do this in one of the auto modes. Okay, the next option is the low direct sun. When the sun is low in the sky, or we're dealing with a lower light source that is close to being in range, but is maybe still a bit too bright, we can get away with a simple bracketed exposure. And the reason that we want to do this, because in the next section, we're going to talk about when we don't want to do that. We want to preserve the color and the highlights. We want to keep all of that saturation and contrast. We can set up that bracketed exposure, but you don't need to even dive into your menu to do this. You can literally take your camera, use it in manual mode, and work out what the exposure is for the sky and work out what the exposure is for the ground or surrounding areas, and just take those 2 pictures. Things like Lightroom can line those 2 pictures up. As long as you don't move your camera around much, keep it pretty static and just wind the shutter speed or ISO or whatever to where you need it to be. Those exposures will line up and Lightroom can do the work for you to put them together. Now, the third backlit look I think is kind of interesting, and there's 2 sorts of variations that I use on this. The backlighting source is either, artificial or it's the sun, but it's so bright that it's not going to be captured in one exposure, but it's also so bright that you can't really realistically bracket for it as well. What we're going to do is we're going to let the highlights blow. Why would we do this? Okay, let's say it's the middle of the day look. The blue in the sky that would be available to us if we used the flash to overpower it isn't worth it, because the style that it's going to give is going to look very much like a sort of a cheesy 1980s magazine shot. And the reality is that colors clash. People don't think stylistically, I think, always enough about colors that are in their pictures. And having that strong blue or strong green, those colors can look really distracting in photographs. Sometimes they can work very, very well if it's done well. But when the sun is really in shot and behind the subject, where the actual light source is in the frame, it's actually better often to just let the highlights blow, because it gives you a cleaner look, like in the photos that I'm showing you here. And I know photographers sort of freak out a lot at the idea that highlights blow, but it's ridiculous, because you see all these street photos where people expose for the highlights and all the dark areas go completely jet black. And no one complains about that, but people get funny when it's highlights for some reason. And I think it's just people repeating things that they've been told, and they're not thinking about what it is that they're saying. They're just saying something, somebody else said it, so I'll say it, right? So blowing the highlights, like in those photos that I just showed you, is a stylistic choice, because it gives a really clean and fresh look, and it's very different. If you went in with flash to this and use this, you can make flash work, absolutely, but it's an extremely different look, and it's not going to have this clean look. It's going to look a lot more grungy and contrasty, and that might not necessarily be what you actually want. That decision is always up to you, though. Now, there's one other technique with this, though, having blown highlights in the picture, and that is doing it at nighttime, because this is really interesting. Something I don't see a lot of people talking about is the idea that nighttime with artificial lighting, so if you're taking street photography, nighttime portraits outdoors, or sort of cityscapes, anything like that, this is a high contrast scene. It's much like the middle of the day, except the light sources are low, many, and scattered. But some of them can be extremely bright, and our dark areas can be extremely dark. So what we actually have is a high contrast scene again. And the nature of those nighttime pictures is often that those light sources are going to be in the frame. So where I talked about, turning off to the side and so on, that can often be not a viable option at nighttime. So what we want to do is underexpose slightly. And the reason we want to underexpose is we want to keep the color in the highlights. I want to underexpose the picture maybe half a stop or one stop. Like in this picture of Ellie and this one, I'm able to manipulate the post-production really easily, because I've pulled the highlights more into that elastic range where I can do something with them and work with those colors. And if you want to know how I edit these pictures to look like this, with this color and mood, and you want to bring that to your images as well, then you should check out my workshops. The links are in the description down below for that. Plus, I also have a free ebook on outdoor portrait photography that looks at a bunch of different lighting scenarios like this, where it shows you the results and how these lighting setups were done with natural or ambient lighting. So check that out in the description down below as well. Remember to leave me a comment. What type of backlighting did you like the most from this? Did any of them really speak to you and think, that's the kind of stuff that I want to do? Let me know in the comments down below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys again in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.